Greetings, I'm Dike Rostant. Welcome back to the TTT News. Well, we've started the new year and the blessings for that and beyond. But traditionally, we know January as the start of the dry season. But with the rain that we've experienced recently, many may be asking whether or not the dry season still keeping. So for that, we go in depth on the dry season with acting chief climatologist at the Meteorological Division under the Ministry of Public Utilities, Kenneth Kerr. It's time to go in depth. Welcome, Mr. Kerr. How are you doing?
I'm fine. Good evening. Thank you for having us, DK. I'm pretty good.
It's very glad to hear. It's really our pleasure. And I want to ask you, even before we get into our proposed talking points, what a time to be a climatologist. I mean, describe your feelings on being a climatologist during this period in our history.
It's a very enlightening feeling. It allows us as climatologists to really bring to bear on policy making and national development in a sustainable way, what the climate can do and how we can plan and act to ensure that we have a livable, a more livable world that we can enjoy going forward, given the challenges that climate change poses for small island developing states like Trinidad and Tobago, where our existence are literally challenged by climate change. So we feel very comfortable and enamored to really make these contributions that we are making.
And with that in mind, because we hear Mia Motley representing small island developing states, we hear other people, climate change is really something that we're hearing about a lot more right now. But with that, what is climatology?
Climatology is an extension of meteorology in that we look at the climate aspect of things. The weather is what is happening now. The climate is the historical long-term trends. And we look at what has happened, what is likely to happen, and how that can impact our society in different ways.
And I really like that aspect of forecasting and looking long-term as opposed to whether or not it's going to rain tomorrow. So I'll ask to get into the significance of that in just a bit. But every year, the Met Office issues a dry season outlook or forecast. But what's the purpose of these seasonal climate outlooks and how can they be used?
Well, DK, the Meteorological Service Division out of the Ministry of Public Utilities play a critical role in helping the country and residents become more aware, become more ready, become more resilient, and therefore more responsive to weather in general, but more so extreme weather and climate events. And in performing this role, our aim is really to provide what we call impact-based decision support services that can enhance the country's ability to really respond or make informed decisions. And at times, some of these decisions are life-saving decisions ahead of any weather event, but more so for extreme weather events. So in a nutshell, we provide service that support all from the local to central government, from the ordinary citizens to those in the agricultural field, or those making decisions, those who have to plan a wedding. We provide this kind of seasonal forecast that they can really make an informed decision ahead of time or be ready for what is likely to come.
And the way that you're saying that makes me want to ask, how is this tied into some of the other work, like looking at it from a policy perspective, from the level of government? If we just look at the line ministry, the Ministry of Public Utilities, what would be some of those decisions or forecasts or information that you're sharing with the Public Utilities Ministry that would help impact some of those concrete things they do? What would some of those actual things be?
Well, the first one, for example, is as simple as water resource management. So, you know, the Water Resource Agency and WASA are responsible for our efficient water supply. And that water, to a large extent, relies on rainfall. And if we provide information to the Water Resource Agency of what the next 6 months rainfall is likely to be, and that allows them to take that quantitative rainfall amounts and place it into their models so that they can plan adequately so that everyone in the country can feel comfortable with the water resource that they are receiving. So that's just one aspect. Then there is the agricultural aspect of things. Then there is the electrical generation side of things where persons may not be aware that temperature plays a significant role in the generation of electricity, as well as water that is used to cool the turbines that generate the electricity. And we know, of course, from an agriculture side of things, then it's a direct link to your food and crop production.
Right. And in terms of receiving these formats, what kind of format does the forecast take? And how does the layman break it down to understand, okay, well, this is what these climatologists are saying?
Well, that's a good question, and I thank you for it. Our seasonal forecasts are probabilistic in nature, meaning that the seasonal maps that we provide typically shows areas that are most likely to be wetter or drier than usual, or cooler or hotter than usual. And sometimes even those areas that are likely to receive or get near normal conditions. So I must say that the nature of a probabilistic forecast means that apart from us telling you that it is likely to be wetter than usual, other outcomes are also possible, just that they are less likely to occur. So we give the most prominent or the most favored category of outcomes. In fact, as a matter of fact, for our probabilities to be reliable, the less likely outcomes must occur. So these forecasts that we give that are probabilistic really conveys how certain we are, as well as how uncertain we are. And it allows the lay person or the average citizen to make an informed decision. Because if, for example, we say that there is a 70% chance that the season is going to be wetter than usual, then that citizen can feel confident that there is a larger percentage, because there is still a 30% chance for other outcomes. So they may make a decision, a different decision if it was a 40% or a 50% chance.
And looking at these probabilistic forecasts, what is the role of having a large data set? So you're able to say, okay, well, when this was happening, when this actually took place, these are the forecasts that we had. And how does climate change factor into having that long data set?
Well, that's a critical component, because from the World Meteorological perspective and from climate scientists' perspective, a 30-year span is what we call a normal. And because not that it covers everything, but it gives us a good insight into what our climate is like. We tend to capture in that 30-year the most extreme events and on both ends of the scale, the top, like for example, the wettest and the driest, the hottest and the coolest, and it allows us to have a good idea of what our climate is like, so that the longer it is, 30 years is the benchmark for a normal, but the longer it is, it will give us even further a better idea of what these extremes are likely to be, because the impacts from a normal or from a mean climate is okay. But when it comes to the extremes, this is where we are impacted most times, and we want to be able to capture those extremes. So having an extensive data set gives us a very good insight into what possible outcomes could occur at any given time in a particular season, because no one season is the same.
And with that in mind, I want to ask you, what does the data set look like trending towards for the dry season in 2022?
Well, the outlook, we gave it before, but I reiterate it here. And I want to make the point before I give it that this is the second dry season in a row that we have had a La Nina climate conditions developing in the central and eastern tropical Pacific Ocean. But this year, our forecast is somewhat different to the one that we issued at this time last year, because some of the climate signals along with La Nina are not as strong and agreeable as last year. But overall, we are saying that the greatest likelihood is that the 2022 dry season will most likely be drier than usual, with upward of 50% probability that this will happen in most areas. And we see that the chance for this to happen drier than usual is greatest in Northeast Trinidad and all of Tobago. But more specifically, we forecast that January is likely to get the usual amount of rainfall, which is not a lot, but still sufficient to suppress the early drying impacts. And we expect that from February onward to about April, that 3-month period, to be the driest 3 months of the dry season. And that is when we expect to see a strengthening of the drying with more dry days than wet days, likely for the months of February, March, and April. Now, let me just place this in perspective, because in terms of rainfall, we forecast between 200 to 500 millimeters of rainfall, because different areas tend to receive different amounts of rainfall, where the Northeast tends to get more rainfall than the Southwest. So
and that is a point, Mr. Kerr, that we want to come back to as soon as we return from this break. We are speaking with the acting chief climatologist at the Meteorological Division, Mr. Kenneth Kerr. Stay with us. We return with more. Welcome back. We are speaking dry season, going in depth on the dry season, and we're very happy to do so with Mr. Kenneth Kerr, Acting Chief Climatologist at the Meteorological Division, Ministry of Public Utilities. Now, Mr. Kerr, just before we took the break, you were talking about the fact that different areas experience different levels of dryness, or should we even say rainfall. What kind of impacts do those things have on the country? And I'll let you answer that after you finish the point that you were making, that.
Yes, I was making the point that we expect, for example, in Northeast Trinidad to have the larger amounts of rainfall compared to the Southwest areas, where we expect that compared to average, between 45 to 72% of the average totals are what we expect in 2022 during the dry season. And typically as well, we tend to get 3 to 8 what we call 7-day dry spells, or no rainfall at all, and about 1 to 5 10-day dry spells in the dry season. And this year we are expecting about 4 to 9 7-day dry spells and 2 to 6 10-day dry spells. And I want to speak a little bit about what that means, because this will bring us to whether or not the question is always, are we going to have drought-like conditions? Well, apart from the month of November, which was significantly dry last year, all of the wet season months produced average to above average rainfall. And therefore, there was no chance for drought to occur during that period. But looking ahead, we do not expect this season to be extremely dry, even though we are saying drier than usual. Neither are we expecting drought conditions to develop, as the chance for this to occur is minimal, basically 20 to 30%. But yes, we expect 1 or 2 short-term drying, but no major concern at this time for short-term drought development. And your question with respect to the drier areas, it is a significant concern across the country. The farmers empowerment would tell you that that area is particularly more dry than the rest of the country. The citizens and the farmers in the Icacos and Southwest Trinidad also are aware that those areas are drier than the Northeast Trinidad and even Northern Trinidad or Central Trinidad. So that has implications for water that is taken from surface water in those locations. And luckily for Trinidad and Tobago, or Trinidad more so than Tobago, but Trinidad, most of the country's reservoirs are in Northeast Trinidad and in Central or near South Trinidad, where some of the larger intakes are and where we tend to get larger amounts of rainfall. And for the dry season, these rainfall, the higher amounts are expected in those areas as well.
But that begs the question, Mr. Kerr, about the level of engagement between divisions, between ministries, because if you have an idea that these areas, they're going to experience more rainfall or they're going to experience less rainfall, what kind of conversations happen between like the Public Utilities Ministry and Works and Transport saying, okay, well, you should be dredging or doing work by this time? Because this is the time that we expect this sort of rainfall to start happening in this area. So what is that conversation like?
Thank you for that question. And this is an important question for us because there is a significant conversation that takes place. Perhaps you have heard about our National Climate Outlook Forum. And at the National Climate Outlook Forum, in November, we had the National Climate Outlook Forum for the dry season, way ahead of time, where we would have provided this forecast that I have provided to you today to all the key sectors, including NGOs. We would have provided this forecast. We provide this forecast twice per year, once before the wet season, where we typically have upwards of 100 participants in these National Climate Outlook Forum, where we provide the forecast and we discuss with the participants what is likely to happen, what kind of actions they can take to mitigate. But let me just add another layer to this. Every month we provide an outlook, and this outlook is distributed to all the key agencies that has some kind of climate sensitive decision making proponent to their decision making. And in particularly the Water Resource Agency, in particularly TNTech, in particularly the Drainage Division, all of these are on our network and we engage them significantly. We have discussions in terms of what the season is likely to do. And let me just add this part because this is an important part. We have moved the forecast away, but you have asked the question before about the format of these forecasts, and I did provide about the probability, but there is an impact-based component. We also provide in these forecasts, not so much what the forecast will be, as you have asked, but what the forecast and the weather events are likely to do. And this is at the level that we provide impact-based forecasting to the key stakeholders so they would know what are the possible impacts and how they can mitigate against these impacts.
And I appreciate that because I can see, okay, well, you're telling me, well, 50 milliliters of rain are going to fall in this area. Okay, yes, that is information. But what happens when that falls? Is there going to be ponding? Is there going to be flooding? So do you find that giving that impact-based report inspires a different sort of response?
It definitely, and we have been doing these kind of impact-based forecasting to these key stakeholders since 2015. And in the beginning, there was not as much understanding of the forecast, but we have held workshops with the key stakeholders. So now the interpretation from our forecast are spot on. They are understanding what we are saying. In fact, they are taking our forecast and now producing their own forecast out of it. You may see, for example, here coming out of the Ministry of Health, for example, hot days are likely, dust is on us, take these particular actions. And this stems definitely from our engagement with the Ministry of Health. The same thing happens with the Water Resource Agency and the agriculture sector. So they have bought into our discussion. And in fact, if we are late on the ball with these discussions, they are the one who reach out to us to ensure that we have the conversation ongoing. For the average public, they may not be aware that these conversations are taking place, but the Met Office tentacles run into all the different sectors, all the key sectors. I have mentioned a few, but almost all the key sectors where water has an impact, where electricity has an impact, because if there's a lightning strike that is likely to knock out an electricity facility, this is directly related to the forecast that we provide. So the TNTech is informed ahead of time whether or not we are going to have an event that could produce lightning that can disrupt their facilities.
And you spoke about the general public, but in the minute that we have remaining, what kind of actions can the general public and stakeholders at large in climate sensitive sectors take to reduce possibly negative impacts, to mitigate those impacts?
Well, specifically, Dike, with less rainfall than usual, we are likely to see an increased level of stress on what we call surface water availability. And this will have a negative implication. So we would say that the first and foremost is to ensure that you conserve water in all forms, to ensure that you have sufficient by storing and managing that store of water safely and adequately, to make sure that the impacts are reduced on you, because sometimes you may not be realizing that when you waste that water, it is impacting different sectors who are not getting the kind of distribution that you may be having. So we ask you to reduce that.
All right, so we want to thank you so much, Mr. Kerr, Kenneth Kerr, the acting chief climatologist at the Meteorological Division, Ministry of Public Utilities. And on behalf of the entire TTT News team, we want to thank you for joining us. I'm Dike Rostant. This has been In Depth with me. Thank you for joining us.